Joining us now to talk about all of this is one of my favorite former colleagues, one of the smartest people out there, retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral John Kirby. He's a former White House National Security Communications Advisor and an MS Now National Security Analyst. He's also probably been on more foreign trips with secretaries of defense and state than almost anyone out there. So I have so much to ask you about, including Donald Trump's claims about the Strait of Hormuz. But we haven't had a chance to talk about this. And I just want to start by asking you about this brand new reporting on this threat. I want to ask you about that. But I also want to ask you about, first, what you think about the plane story and how it's been mishandled across the board in terms of the management of the press, the lack of transparency, the conflicting reporting on the threats. And then we'll get to the specific new threat. But first, I just want to ask you about your just overall gut reaction here.
Well, look, first, I'm certainly glad that Mr. Trump is safe, and I don't default the White House for going to lengths to protect him, including, doing this idea of a plane swap. You got to make sure the president is safe. That's their job at the Secret Service. That said, they also have an obligation, as you well know, too, Jen, when you're traveling with the president of the United States, there's an obligation for the safety and security of those folks that are traveling with you, including the press. And it just seems unconscionable to me that these people were allowed to stay on that aircraft unwitting of the danger that they were in. A simple fix would have been to take the press into the confidence, take them off the record. You don't have to tell them everything. You don't have to unveil all the intelligence, but let them know there's a threat. Let them know there's going to be some mitigating actions to reduce that threat. You'll fully brief them when you can, and give them the option about whether they want to stay on that jet or not. That would have been the right thing to do. So I completely have sympathized with members of the media, and I suspect some of the members of the staff that weren't told and flew on a plane that was in greater danger than they had any idea.
Yeah, there's so many unbelievable aspects of this story. But as you and I both know well, the press corps in Washington is very familiar and experienced in navigating, not reporting sensitive national security details about presidential travel. And they've done that on countless trips for decades, and certainly could have been brought into confidence here, and bringing them an unwitting trip where they could have been a danger is unethical at a minimum. Let me ask you about this new reporting I mentioned earlier. The Washington Post is reporting that the CIA had low confidence in Iranian threats before Trump switched planes in Turkey, saying, quote, in the reporting, the assassination threat was relayed by the Israeli government to the CIA, where analysts did not view the intelligence as compelling and relayed that skepticism to Trump administration officials, one of the officials said. Another official called the reports of threats against Trump's life Israeli-derived, not U.S.-generated, and viewed as low confidence. I wanted to talk to you about this because, in part, we're both quite familiar with the vernacular of government. What do you make of that reporting and kind of what it means about this threat, as far as you can suss out?
Well, it does seem to be consistent with the view of the CIA with respect to Israeli intelligence of late. You might remember there was reporting that Mr. Ratcliffe was not convinced that the Israeli intelligence was correct, that you could, decapitate the Iranian regime with a strike on Khamenei and cause regime change. And he kind of called it BS there in the Situation Room. So this is, I think, of a piece of his natural skepticism and the skepticism of the professional intelligence analysts at the CIA. Obviously, you and I haven't seen that, so we're in no position to judge it. But again, I don't begrudge the Secret Service for being overly cautious and not being willing to take a risk, even if there wasn't unanimity about the veracity of the intelligence.
It's true. What's also true is a president and his close advisors can go back to the Secret Service and say, I understand the threat, but I need a different plan. That's what President Clinton did. That's clearly not what happened here. Let's talk about where we are in this war. I just mentioned this, but Donald Trump said today that the USA has total control over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, we know that is not the case exactly. We know that traffic is not moving as it should be moving, and that's why, of course, gas prices are continuing to be as high as they are. But walk us through what is actually happening there, given how familiar you are with what happens with the Navy and what is happening on the ground.
So the blockade has been effective. In fact, they just targeted another vessel that was running the blockade yesterday successfully. They've got assets both on the sea and above the sea that are monitoring this, and they know when the Iranian ships are leaving port, and they're being effective at keeping them from getting to open waters. That said, the data, the numbers, just over the last 24 hours disproves what the president has been saying. A total of 16 ships transited the Strait of Hormuz in the last 24 hours, 11 of them going in, 5 of them going out. The majority of them used the northern route, the route that is administered by Iran, the safer route right now. So it's just implausible to believe that Iran doesn't have a measure of control over the strait. Most of the ships are not using the U.S. Navy monitored route. They're using the Iranian monitored route because they believe that that's safer. And I think that's where we're going to be for quite some time unless we get some kind of resolution here. It seems like the president is pulling back from the idea of bombing, pulling back from the idea of negotiations, and just kind of waiting them out. He's not wrong that their economy is suffering badly, can't pay the troops, high inflation. They're suffering economically for sure, and the blockade's helping with that. The question is, who can handle the pain for the longer period of time? The Iranians don't really care, as you know, about their people, and they don't really care about the health of the economy, certainly not the hardliners. They believe they can wait that pain out longer than Mr. Trump can wait out the political pain and the pain that's at the gas pump here in the United States.
I wanted to ask you about a story I talked with Senator Ossoff about during the last hour, and I find it gutting and outrageous, and you are from a multi-generational family who has served in the military. There is this new reporting and this is from now in Stars and Stripes, I should say, that interviews with active duty sailors and family members, along with dozens of public social media comments and posts by crew members, describe sailors struggling with exhaustion, declining morale, including reports of suicidal thoughts, and at least one instance where a crew member was prevented from jumping overboard. I find that so outrageous. And I just wonder what you think when you hear that reporting, given your record of service, your entire family's record of service.
It's very sad, but it's absolutely believable. When I deployed to the Persian Gulf, Jen, when I was a young officer in 1988, Reagan sent us over there to escort tankers in and out. Our deployment was 6 months in length. We deployed on time and we got home on time exactly 6 months later. We were ready for that length of duty. These sailors are now being deployed for much, much longer periods of time with not a real clear sense of both when they're leaving and when they're coming home, and deployments like that. And they also they don't have the luxury of pulling into port in Bahrain like when I did, pull into port and, get a beer, relax a little bit. They can't do that because there's no port in the Middle East that's safe for them. So they have to stay at sea, and staying at sea for that period of time, months and months, almost a year, that wears them down. So I have no doubt at all believing the stories that they are fatigued, that they are concerned, that their morale is low. I suspect that the ships are also going to need a lot more maintenance when they get home because the sea is a brutal environment for any vessel. These are long deployments with very little predictability and certainty, and that weighs heavily.
Especially in the moment we're in, and reports of not enough food and all sorts of things that is heart-wrenching. John Kirby, always a pleasure. So informative. Thank you so much for being here with me tonight.
Good to be with you, Jen. Thank you.